Hi, my name is Mary Geeson. I'm here with iCater, which stands for Iowa Center for Assistive Technology, Education and Research. This is Amanda Lewis, and we'll be speaking with her today. Amanda, just to get things rolling, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm a school psychologist, so my work is largely involved in identifying students that need additional services to be successful in school settings. We work birth through 21, but we're usually working in the K through 12 setting. I also work with schools to help them have better systems in general to promote learning for all.
Well, that's very interesting. Can you tell us how you got into that?
Yeah, so I'm actually a student with disabilities myself, so I have specific learning disabilities in both written expression and math calculation. And when I was going through my elementary school years, I was officially diagnosed when I was 8, but we were thinking there might be something going on prior to that, and we really struggled. My parents really struggled with working with the schools to try and make sure that my needs were met, that my educational needs were met so I could be successful. And ultimately they were not successful in being able to get the schools to work with us and work with our needs, so they ended up homeschooling me, which was very, very successful and an excellent fit for me and for my family. But as I got older, I realized, wow, that's really a privilege that my family was able and willing to do that, and that's just simply not the case. Really the majority of families, and part of the point of our public school system is that we would be able to serve all students, and so I decided that was really a problem I wanted to help address by starting to look at, okay, how can we make our schools places of excellent learning for all students?
Mm-hmm. And that kind of seems to lead into your big aspiration for your career.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really feel like my big goal is to be a systems change agent to really try and adjust how our school system is working so it can better serve all students, but very particularly students with disabilities. Really the angle I'm thinking I'll take is, we've got a lot of excellent people doing a lot of excellent work in our university settings, doing research. We've got a lot of great centers doing that. We've got a lot of great centers in government doing excellent research as well. We've got a lot of wonderful, dedicated practitioners discovering new things in practice and trying to help each other and mentor each other, doing great things on the ground. We've got tons of dedicated parents and families really working hard to get their students the best, and a lot of fantastic kids who are really doing their best too. But I feel like there's not a lot of communication between those parties and the policymakers who are making the systems in which all of these people are working. And so what I'd really like to do is assist in that communication so we can have systems that are informed by our very best research and practice, as well as the needs of our students and families and practitioners.
That sounds so powerful. Going into You shared that you have a disability. What kind of barriers in the workplace can you see happening or have you experienced?
In some ways I've been really blessed because I sought an area to work in that disability is what I do, and so the people who I'm working with to some extent, usually already are familiar with disability. But even within a system like that, I still run into quite an interesting thing. I mean, for me personally, as someone with invisible disabilities, people don't realize that I have them unless I disclose, which kind of introduces some interesting things of when and how that will change how people view me. One of the things I've really struggled with, like I kind of explained that my personal experience as a person with disabilities has really informed my career and my passion for what I do. But when, say, I go to interview for a job, I'm kind of in this interesting place where, should I disclose? Should I disclose this thing that fuels my passion for this job, but at the same time, because of the stigmas we have in our society, the truth of the matter is a lot of times when people have two equally qualified candidates, they say to themselves, well, I could have this person with a disability or this person without, and they'll go with the person without because all they see with the disability is a liability, which I think is really sad. because I think that people with disabilities have some skills and perspectives they can bring to the table that add value. I've also kind of had a lot of kind of interesting interactions because learning disabilities are a newer term and not as well understood in the general population. There's been a lot of confusion when I disclose having a learning disability, what that really means. So probably the most common reaction I get when I say, oh, I have learning disabilities is, oh, but you're so smart. And so I end up having to do a lot of advocacy and explain to people what a learning disability really means, and that it's completely separate and apart from intelligence. And in fact, by definition, a learning disability means that you're having difficulty in some specific academic skill that you shouldn't be given your intelligence. So that's something that, particularly in a workplace setting, then I'm, not only am I disclosing I have a disability, then I'm having to also explain my disability doesn't mean what you think it means, which I think is kind of a twofold problem, because then you're in the situation of having the stigma of your own disability coupled with the stigmas of disabilities that aren't yours but are being conflated with yours.
So with all of that in the workplace, what could help you or people with disabilities?
I think one of the things that I think is really important to recognize is, and I believe this of people in general, that people don't roll out of bed and say to themselves, you know what, I want to not do anything of value today or with my life. I want to just skate through. People want to do well and do something that's meaningful. Absolutely. And I think it's important for employers to trust themselves that, okay, we're going to hire good people, and then trust those people that, yes, we're here to work for you, we're here to give you value, we're here to do the job that you hired us to do, and give them that trust and that flexibility and that support to do that. And that's going to look different for everyone, whether or not they have a disability. But I think having that kind of a company culture or organizational culture is really important for having an effective organization, and is going to provide that room and that support for your employees with disabilities. Again, like I said, that's going to look different for each person. So some people, the most important thing might be flexibility in terms of timelines. They might need to be able to work at their own pace a little bit more. Other people, it might need to be flexibility in terms of hours or how they work, the way that they create their products, whatever it might be. But really thinking about, okay, what are the essential things that you want? What is the value that you want your employee to provide? And then not worry about how they get there quite so much.
That's a really good point. What's the goal? Not the path they take to the goal.
And again, I think that's true for everyone. We want people to do their best work.
So setting up this organization and place of employment that's comfortable for all, not just suited for people with disabilities, is really important.
And then you have the room built in for people with disabilities to be really natural contributors to your organization. I always say, if you worry about satisfying ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the legal requirements for employing people with disabilities, you're going to end up shortchanging yourself. Whereas if you really focus on creating a good culture like that, you're going to maximize your employees, all of them.
Do you use any assistive technology, either in school or in the workplace?
Absolutely. So I kind of slid by this when I was introducing myself. So I'm currently a doctoral student, but I'm also working as a school psychologist in the schools. So I kind of wear both hats in terms of the tools I'll use as a student versus the tools I use as a professional. But there's a lot of overlap too. If you think about it, students are really doing their professional work at that time in their lives. Probably the most transformative tool that I've used, and I've been using it I guess my first introduction was in middle school, but I really started using it more heavily in college when my writing demands increased quite a bit. Was Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is a speech-to-text software. What it does is I'll speak and it'll just write down what I'm saying, so that seems to kind of get around some of my written expression difficulties and allows me to produce both the volume and the quality of work that I'm capable of without those roadblocks of my written expression just sort of getting in the way quite so much. I usually do have the caveat of, is writing easy for me with that? Not necessarily. The learning disability is still there. It's still affecting my process. But that allows me to produce to the level that I need to in order to be good at what I do. That's been really transformative, not just from a student perspective, but now as a working school psychologist, producing the kinds of reports and things that we need in order to document and then support students with disabilities.
Well, and then your time can be spent elsewhere rather than just shuffling through this paper or this report you need to do.
Right, it's an efficiency thing, and you actually bring up a really good point of time. School psychologists, I always say, the drain on our executive function, our ability to be able to juggle things and organize things and pay attention to many different types of things going on, because we'll have many different cases on our caseload at the same time, would be a challenge for anyone. I actually do have some ADHD as well, the inattentive type. And so for me, even more so, having some supports for that has been really important. So I use some tools actually on my cell phone, so that way they're with me all the time. That's been really helpful. I have a list making tool called Wonderlist that I use. I've got different lists for all different kinds of things. I use a lot of different timers and things just kind of for time management, because you have to be mindful of where you're allocating your time. And I think it's really wonderful that there's such a variety of tools available now. The old ad campaign, there's an app for that. I often tell people that the question isn't, is there an app for that? The question is, which app for that would you like? Now it's just a matter of finding it. And so over the years, I've really been able to adjust the tools that I'm using depending on the demands I have at the time. And I think that that's a really important thing for people to recognize too, and everyone does it whether they realize it or not. You build the toolbox that you need for what you're doing right then, and then when you have a new challenge, you might need a new tool. When your demands change, you might not use a tool that you used all the time before. That's okay, that's normal.
Yeah, that happens all the time. And it's great that, like you said, now we have the option of, one tool to do 50 different things or 50 tools to do one thing.
Yeah, and I think, now that we have these portable computers in our hands, our cell phones, our laptops, our tablets, those tools can go with you everywhere.
Is there any other assistive technology you use on a daily basis?
Trying to think. I guess I should really be clear that Dragon Naturally Speaking, the speech-to-text software I use is used on mine is on a PC. It is available for Mac, but because of that, I'm actually bringing an Ultrabook around with me, so that having it housed on that computer is a very important thing. So that actual hardware is an important tool for me. And again, a lot of my other tools are on there as well. So I guess it's important to consider not just the tool itself, but how you'll be using it. I really don't know what I do without a laptop. I'm really glad we live in a time where we have that tool.
Absolutely. And then even being in a work setting where they might let you use your laptop that already has all your tools on it and runs well with them could be a good accommodation.
Right. Well, and that's an excellent point. Yeah, we know a lot of organizations will have, house computers, they'll provide machines, and that's a wonderful benefit for many, many employees, but having that flexibility to maybe allow an employee to have their own machine that's optimized for their tools, and then maybe having your IT folks put in whatever firewalls and security things are needed on that machine as well. That's a really reasonable accommodation.
Can you tell us why you'd be a great employee?
Being someone who was and at this point still is a student with disabilities myself, can be a really positive thing. I think we need more voices at the table when we're talking about what do we do for students with disabilities of adults who were there themselves. I think that's true anytime you're trying to solve a problem, that you have the people whose problem it is involved. I think it's also very reassuring for parents and families and students to talk with people who have navigated similar difficulties. I think that can be a really reassuring thing, especially when we're talking about something that's as loaded with stigma as disability is. I feel like those experiences really fueled my passion for this job. I think, anytime someone's excited about the work they're doing, you're gonna get great work.
Absolutely.
I literally cannot imagine doing anything else but this. This has been my dream since I was 15 years old. So I think that's something that can't be undervalued. I kind of mentioned earlier that, people, when you're trying to decide between two equally qualified candidates and one has a disability and one does not, and a lot of times people lean towards the one that does not because they see the liability in disability. I feel like my disability has actually promoted the development of some really important skills that make me a better employee as well. And from my conversations with other people with disabilities, I think a lot of them have had similar experiences. I feel like because I've had things be hard for me, I know how to ask for help. I've seen a lot of problems happen because people didn't know when something wasn't working and that they needed to call in for backup. So I feel like that's something that because of my life experiences I've learned how to do. I've learned how to reach out for help and reach out for support and resources. Kind of related to that, I know how to work. I'm considered twice exceptional. I'm bright, and a lot of times people who are very intelligent don't need to work as hard because things are apparent to them, and that's wonderful. No matter how smart you are, there will always be times when you got to work. You got to buckle down and work, and I feel like I had to learn that earlier and practice that more because I hit ceilings much younger than someone with my intelligence normally would. And again, that's something you want in an employee, someone who knows how to buckle down, get their nose to the grindstone and work. I think people with disabilities, everything is something of an efficiency game because you're having to expend more time and more energy than your average bear on the things that are difficult for you. And so for me personally, I've had to learn how to kind of grapple with my perfectionistic tendencies and say, that's good enough. And that's not something that I think employers usually think of as wanting an employee. People say, oh, my biggest flaw is perfectionism. Put themselves in a good light. But actually, in most workplaces, you don't want someone who perseverates on something that's perfectly functional, perfectly acceptable. You want them to be able to look at something and say, this will do what I need it to do. It is solid. Let's move on. And again, that's a skill we don't teach people, but many people with disabilities have to learn that as a matter of survival. Another thing that I feel like I've really had to develop is my ability to advocate for myself. Again, we touched on this a little bit with explaining to people my disability, particularly since they are invisible. But I think that's really important to be able to explain who you are and what your position is and what your needs are in a way that's effective and respectful. And recognize that sometimes people won't understand right away. So being able to even deal with some conflict. That's something I think employers absolutely should value. Things aren't always going to go smoothly, even if you have the best negotiator and mediator skills known to man. You're going to have some conflict once in a while, and so being able to be comfortable with that and have the confidence to be like, if I keep at this, I can help people come to an understanding. I can help people recognize their mutual interests and goals. That's an important skill, particularly if you're working with people, and most jobs involve working with people. And that's really kind of a subset of what I guess is kind of what I consider one of my personal strengths, which is problem solving. Being able to look at a situation, recognize what things aren't working and which of those things you can change, and then move on it. And then evaluate what's going on and see, okay, is this working? Did this fix the problem? Do we need to tweak it? And working with that cycle, that's something that people with disabilities have to work with all the time, because again, the demands are changing, your experience of your disability may be changing, and so you internalize that problem-solving method in a way that I think makes you a really valuable employee, because you can come into a situation and use that, even though it's not as personal, you can use that just as naturally.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the advocating for yourself, especially in your career where you're working with students. Knowing how to advocate for yourself has definitely helped you advocate for students and time again.
Certainly, and I think it's important, particularly in my job, for students to see that modeling. They're going to learn how to advocate for themselves by watching strong advocates advocate for them initially when they're younger, and then gradually taking those reins over. So even though I am not an educator in the sense that our teachers are, I do think that I can offer some opportunities for families and students to learn some of those skills, because I had to learn them myself.
Of course.
And I didn't learn them in a vacuum. I had excellent, teachers and mentors, and my family was enormously supportive, and so I really feel like a lot of what I do is kind of paying that forward, that I was fortunate enough to receive those things, and I want to, make it possible for as many people as possible to access the opportunities that I may not have been able to access had I been less fortunate.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
One of the things I think is just really important is, we right now in our world, we're really talking a lot about the importance of diversity and the importance of recognizing the beauty in diverse experiences and diverse perspectives, and the richness that comes from that. And I feel like a lot of times disability is left out of that conversation, and I would just encourage our viewers to consider how disability can enrich the work that you're doing, how people with disabilities can contribute to the efforts that you're engaged in, and the ways that you can promote that by considering how you can make your organization more flexible and more welcoming for that, because I really do believe that is for everyone's benefit.
Yeah, that's wonderfully put.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Amanda, for coming in today.
Absolutely, Mary. It was a pleasure.
Great interview.